Now let's discuss the sources of tax laws. So as I have said, there is only one source of the tax law in general, and that is the National Internal Revenue Code. However, there are few rulings, statutes that might help the implementation of the tax law. So number one, the Philippine Constitution. Again, our Constitution does not provide any tax or tax rates or any tax law. However, in the Constitution, it provides limits, no? And we also have the statutes and presidential decree. As we have discussed earlier, the president or the executive branch cannot make tax laws. The power to make tax laws is solely exercisable by the Congress and the Senate. They are the ones who will make the tax law. If na ay buhaton nga decree or statute si president, he can do so, but only for the implementation or siguro mga memorandums on how this law will be implemented, but the president himself cannot make or cannot impose a tax. Next, we also have revenue regulations. So, revenue regulations are interpretations or guidance or rulings made by the Commissioner of Internal Revenue. So, as of now, we have Cesar Dulay, our Commissioner on Internal Revenues. It is provided in our tax code or the National Internal Revenue Code that the primary responsibility to interpret the tax law is lodged with the Commissioner. Meaning to say, after mabuhat ni Congress and Senate ang tax law, the one to interpret or ang pinakaunang yun makagunit-an nga balaod is the Commissioner of Internal Revenue. Siya ang una mugunit-ana, siya ang mo-interpret. Because the Commissioner will issue guidelines, will issue rulings, regulations based upon sa tax law. Again, it is not the Supreme Court, it is not the President, but the Commissioner of Internal Revenue. Siya ang pinakauna mo interpret sa law. Now, when after the implementation, after the interpretation, na ay mo arise nga dispute, huwag na i-case nga ni question si taxpayer ngano ing ani man ang akong tax ginabayaran, ngano ing ani man na siya, usay pasabot na ani. So if the dispute cannot be settled sa CIR nga level, sa commissioner nga level, it can be raised sa Court of Tax Appeals. If dili pa gyud ma-settle sa Court of Tax Appeals, it can be raised further to the Supreme Court. So in this case, when the Supreme Court holds the case, then mo step in the Supreme Court to render his interpretation. And again, dili siya ingon nga si Supreme Court ang nagbuhat og primary interpretation. Ang kay Supreme Court is just to settle the dispute. Because the primary responsibility to interpret the tax law is lodged with the Commissioner. We also have the admin rulings and opinions, so mga expert opinions. They can be a source of kumbaga ideas on how these taxes or tax guidelines are being imposed. However, the opinions of experts do not necessarily mean the law itself. So, kung kinsay mas mo prevail between opinions and the law, syempre si law ang mo prevail. So for example, in my case today, I am discussing this. So whatever opinions or whatever teachings I rendered, posible siya nga mali, or posible siya nga na ay mas better interpretation, or posible siya nga na ay na-miss out na ako nga fact. So my opinion will be of lesser value compared to the law itself. Next, we have the judicial decisions. As I have said earlier, the Supreme Court can render its interpretation. We also have provincial, city, or municipal and barangay ordinances when relating to the issuances, no? We also have treaties and international agreements, mga international committee. We will now focus our discussion on the concept of tax. So, from the previous discussion, you have already learned the taxation power, the inherent powers of the state, the principles, doctrines of taxation, the escape of taxation, and more. So, in this case, we will now focus on the concept of tax. A tax is an enforced, proportional contribution imposed upon persons, property, and rights, and levied by the lawmaking body of the state, which is, in our case, the Congress and the Senate. So, there are a few characteristics of tax. First, it is a forced charge. It is a forced charge. Forced meaning sa pilitan, because you can say no to tax. You cannot deny the possibility that you will be liable to tax. A tax is not something that you agreed, no? It is something that we should pay because we live in this government. Bisag unsaon na to, magbayad yun taong tax because otherwise, we could be criminally prosecuted. So, magbayad na lang tag tax. It is also generally payable in money. Meaning to say, there is no other way in settling down the tax but to pay money. You can pay in kind, you can pay in property, but money. It is exclusively levied by the legislative body of the government. As I have said, only the Congress and the Senate can make tax laws. Pero syempre, ang nangolekta sa taxes nato is si BIR, which is under the executive branch of the government. Ang pagkolekta. But the policy making belongs solely to the legislative body of the government. A tax is assessed in accordance with some reasonable rule of apportionment or the ability to pay principle. So, as we discussed earlier, the tax should be based on the capacity or ability of the taxpayer to pay. The more you earn, the more you pay. It is also imposed by the state within its jurisdiction. So, as I have mentioned earlier, the government cannot tax those persons or objects or properties outside its jurisdiction. And the tax levied for is for public purpose. So, the taxes collected by the government cannot be used to the interest of one person or private individuals, but it must be used solely for public purpose. So, now let's go to classification of taxes. There are many kinds of taxes. So, we have, as a subject matter, we have personal tax. In this kind of tax, it is a tax payable by a person. A property tax is imposed upon property. So, an example of personal tax is an income tax. An income tax is imposed upon persons. Ikaw ang gitaxan, ikaw magbayad. Sa property tax, the tax is being imposed on the property itself, not on the owner. Pero syempre, because the property cannot pay for itself, then the owner of the property will pay the tax for the property. Example of this is the property tax, kanang sa lupa nato, sa mga lupa din ha. So, again, every year, so, same deadline no, sa April 15, we will pay property tax sa city government. So, ang gitaksan ana is dili ang tao, dili ang owner, but the property. We also have excise tax. Excise tax are those taxes imposed on the rights. Yes, our rights are being subject to tax. For example, our right to sell. Our right to sell is subject to tax, and that is called the VAT. Another example, our right to give. Our right to give is also being taxed. Ang tax ana is dollar's tax. Or our right to transfer property upon our death. Kung naa kay will and testament. So, your right to transfer your property is also being taxed, and that is estate tax. Custom duties. These are taxes imposed upon imported goods. We also have as to burden. Who will pay the tax? If you remember, the impact and incidence of taxation. Diba, Sam said, the impact and the incidence may rest on the same person. That is called direct tax. Kung kinsa ang gitaksan, siya po'y magbayad. So, direct tax na siya. While indirect tax, if the impact of taxation rests on one person, and the incidence of taxation rests on different person, that is indirect. Kung kinsa ang gitaksan, lahi ang nagbayad pod. So, example, VAT. As to purpose, we have general and special tax. So, by default, all tax laws or all taxes collected are for general purpose. However, the government can make or impose a tax law or impose a tax for special purpose. But at this time and today, we only have the general tax. All taxes we pay to the government belongs to the general fund. As to measure of application, we have specific tax and ad valorem tax. A specific tax is a tax in an amount, no? In pesos. For example, cigarettes. Ang cigarettes, 5 pesos, 6 pesos, dili siya rate ang tax, but amount itself. While ad valorem tax is in percentage. For example, the VAT. If you sell something, whatever the amount, whatever the value, you will pay the 12% VAT. So ad valorem siya. As I have said, when you say specific tax, meaning specific ang amount. But ad valorem tax, it means sa value, no? Ad valorem. As taxing authority, we have the national tax and the local tax. The national tax is sanctioned by the national government. So the local tax is sanctioned by the local government. So in our discussions in the future, we will discuss more on the national taxes because this is the focus of the income taxation, which is in national tax. As to rate, we have progressive, regressive, digressive, and proportionate tax. A progressive tax, kanang tax rate nga, magkadako ang value, ang bracket, magkadako po ng iyahang tax. For example, our income tax. So, the 250,000 to 400,000 is subject to 20%. 400 to 800,000 is subject to 25%, and so on. That's progressive tax. Whereas, regressive tax is baliktad. Magkadako ang bracket, magkagamay po ang imuhang tax, which is not applicable in the Philippines. Same as digressive tax. In proportion